Dragons? I'm back here to do my 2022 reading stats, and I love doing this video. I'm a big stats girl, and I will be changing how I do my stats. So how I've been doing them for the past couple of years is I've been writing down every book and putting them into categories, but I always feel like I miss stuff. So I'm gonna use Covers with Cassidy, her spreadsheet, and do that. And I started doing one midway through the year this year. I don't know whose I used. I think I used Book Roasts, and I lost the spreadsheet midway through the year. I deleted it accidentally and I couldn't get it back. And by the time I realized I deleted it, it was like months and months ago. So I really am going to focus on doing that and kind of trying to keep better stats because I actually like statistics. I think it's super fun, and her spreadsheet does it for me, which makes my life easier. So yeah, my reading goal every single year is to read 100 books. I've had that since I started on Goodreads and I was tracking books. So this year, my secret goal has always been to read 200 books since I started tracking, and I was able to do that this year. So I was able to read 225 books. So sort of going over my goal. My real goal one year is to reach 250. Last year I came the closest. I think I read 242 books. But I didn't come anywhere close to that. I mean, I came a little bit close, but I didn't read as many, and I think that's because I had a massive reading slump in September through November. Like, literally, December was the first month that I was constantly picking stuff up, so really happy that that happened towards the end of the year, but I'm going to try to avoid that in the next year, because I hate reading slumps. They make me feel so, like, out of sorts. And then I read 88 2022 books, which I think is a pretty good stat. I read 111 backlist titles, which actually tends to be the highest number of books I read, because at the end of the previous year, I tend to focus on reading a lot of those backlist titles, especially in the first couple of months, because I have more books to choose from. And I always make lists, like self-destruct lists and stuff, so all that other stuff. So tends to be my biggest category is always that. And I read 62 young adult books this year, which was actually a pretty good stat. I think I was beating myself up a little bit because when I was looking at my stats overall, I didn't have as much YA fantasy books as I wanted. And for that stat, I was able to read 31 young adult fantasy books. And I think that just happened this year. That's like a lower number for me. And I think what happened is when I was in my reading slump for those 3 months, and especially over the summer, I don't read a ton of fantasy. I just don't gravitate towards those books. But I think it was also like my reading slump really limited me from what I was reading. So I only read 31 young adult fantasy books. And I read 20 contemporary. But honestly, like, I read all of my favorite authors, and some of them didn't even come out with books this year. So I'm pretty happy with that stat. And then I read 11 young adult thrillers. Thrillers is the one genre I want to read more of in 2023, whether it be young adult, whether it be adult, whether it be cozy mystery. It's just something I want to read more of because I love mysteries, and I love them when they're I tend to read mysteries when they're wrapped up in other books. Like, in a fantasy book, we'll have a really good mystery plot, but I want to read more pure mysteries and thrillers. So yeah, that's where we are with that. I read 50 middle grade books, which is a pretty good stat for me, and a lot of those were fantasy, which is definitely what I read. I think I started to use Storygraph this year, and I'm going to definitely use it next year too, that I'm going to track how many fantasy books I read, but it's definitely probably, with all of the categories, my highest category is definitely fantasy, because I like fantasy a lot. I also read 50 audiobooks, and again, those 3 months was rough on my focus for everything, but especially with audiobooks, because I was just having a rough entertainment year, so trying to sort of find stuff that would capture me was hard. And I read 6 nonfiction books. This I'm a little bit disappointed in, I'll be a little bit honest. I had hoped to read a few more. But I found midway through the year that I was listening to more podcasts, and I'm gonna there's some podcasts like that I love, like I'm gonna listen to Millennial, I'm gonna listen to Prophecy Radio, I'm gonna listen to Mugglecast, and all of those, but I'm gonna give my time back to audiobooks and find an audiobook every week that I'm listening to that's nonfiction, and I'm also gonna try to read some physically nonfiction. That is my hardest thing for me to do, because it's not something I gravitate towards, because I always feel like I'm in school. So I have to get back to that. I was really good in 2020, obviously during the pandemic, but since then I got a little bit out. of that. I also read 40 adult romances slash mysteries. I could have divided that, but when I was making my list, I like reorganized it again and I made a mistake when I was doing that. So I read 40 adult romances and mysteries. Definitely more mystery than romance, but I have enjoyed it. I also read 14 historical romances, which is really good. I just want to be more consistent with that stat and I want to read one a month, but there would be months where I went like 4 months without reading stuff, and then 1 month I read three in a month. So I want to be more consistent with that. I want to pick up more. I read 45 sequels this year, which I think is a very, very good stat. And I remember I was like kind of like making a list of the series I want to continue it, and I'm in the middle of a lot of series, but that stat's actually pretty impressive for me because it means that I did gravitate towards them. But for 2023, I'm gonna make it a goal of not counting companion books in that. I think that inflated my number a little bit, but still a really good stat. And I was able to catch up, like I'm on publication order for 10 series and I completed 11 series, which is actually pretty good. I'm gonna do a video of that in the next couple of weeks, so keep a nose out for that. I read 39 e-arcs, which I'm really happy with. I definitely want to read more this year. I think my number this year is like 60, but that's a pretty good stat. I read 12 graphic novels, which again are great for readathons or great for like boss battles and stuff, which I'm really proud of myself for. I read 29 non-white authors, which I think is a very, very good stat. I'm going to just track diversity in general this year, which will kind of include the next stat because I just want to read more diversely in a bunch of different areas. So, but that's a pretty good stat. I've read almost 30 non-white authors. There might be a few more, to be honest with you, but that's all the ones I could track. And then I read 14 LGBTQ plus books. So those are my stats. I think the one area or the one thing I'm going to come out of this is definitely to read more young adult fantasy because there's so many series that either I didn't read in 2022 or I just never read. And I want to definitely make it a goal to read more mysteries and thrillers. So let me know what your stats were. Let me know if you're proud of your reading. We should all be proud of our reading. I sometimes when I tell people I read this much, they're like, oh my goodness, I read like a book. If you read one book in a year, be proud of yourself. If you read one book a month, be proud of yourself because some people don't read at all. And I think it's just great. And I know we're all competitive with each other and we're competitive in other ways, but just be proud of whatever you read because I'm proud of what I read. So I'll talk to you guys for my next video. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the flip side. Bye, book dragons.